I work hard for my results, and I need my diet dialed in. The RP Diet app tells me what to eat to keep me on track and offers suggestions for changes based on my responses, giving me the freedom to choose my path. A personal digital diet coach for less than $15 a month? Yeah, that works.
Hey folks, welcome back to the webinar. Dr. James Hoffman with my colleague and super best buddy, Dr. Mike Israetel. Heavy sigh, I feel you. Okay, so we were just ranting about like how shitty our days have gone. And for all you California people, you'll appreciate this. I was about to smog my car today because my registration renewal came up. It was like, okay, well, to renew your registration, you got to get your smog. I'm like, all right, I'm going to get my smog. My check engine light comes on my car, just totally randomly, which is like instant smog fail. So then I got to go to the dealership and like get my fucking car fixed. And they're like, oh, there's like a 5-day wait, like all this nonsense. Fuck. But they gave me a rental car because it turns out my Jeep had like 2 or 3 recalls on it. And they're like, bro, you got to get some. I was like, I didn't know.
Holy shit.
And so they're like, we're going to give you a rental car. I'm like, okay, cool. They give me the fucking biggest man truck, you know, like big black truck ever. It's like a fucking Ram quad cab. It's just like a bus, dude. I'm like, what? So I'm driving around this ridiculous ass truck for the next couple of days while I'm getting my car fixed.
That's crazy. Man, at least California is not a place of tight parking spaces. The southern where you're at is not.
Yeah.
If you were in the Bay Area, you would be just completely fucked.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny, but man, California bureaucracy, even with cars, it's like fucking, I can't even like get a fucking renew my registration without going through like 10 steps. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Remember when we lived in Tennessee? I literally went to the registration office and they just handed me a license plate. They were like, here's $20, here you go. Like, boom, done.
That's so sweet. Yeah.
That was sweet. Ugh. Yeah.
You only have to put up with Cali for so much longer.
That's right. We close in like 10 days.
Yahoo. All right. Shall we get to it?
Let's get to it. We got a relatively kind of short list today, so we'll do some YouTubes and maybe just have a short one today.
Okay. So coming up first is Kevin D. Farley. You ready for a politically incorrect joke, James? Because here it comes.
Oh, no. Does he like the D?
No. I was going to go another way with that. Much more incorrect. Kevin, I want to apologize about what happened to your brother, Chris.
Oh. Too soon. Still too soon.
Way too soon.
Still too soon.
I guess Kevin's probably of an age, if I had to guess, that Chris probably could have been his father more than his brother.
Yeah. Okay. Did you see the semi-recent Adam Sandler Netflix special?
No.
So he did like it was kind of a weird like hodgepodge of like various events that he did, and he played like a bunch of songs and did some of his stand-up, and it was fun. You know, like I like him. It was good, but then out of nowhere, he does a Chris Farley tribute, and it was like too much. It was like, no, this isn't what I was signed up for. Laughs, not
crying.
This, not crying over Chris Farley. Not cool.
Yeah, Chris Farley was the best. He was the best at what he did. All right, Kevin D. Farley, no relation, I assume. Says, hey, docs, I'll admit that I've broken the rules and voided the hypertrophy template, and I'm using customized version for myself and only myself. Well, you've broken no real rules.
I do that all the time.
You own that product. You can do whatever the fuck you want with it. I've changed around the workouts for the drop-down menus, added rep range 5 to 30.
Oh, I see what he's saying.
For most, using 3R instead of 3 from fail.
That's basically the same thing.
Same thing.
Those are synonymous.
Okay. But I kept the rating system and a few other things. I understand formulas and macros for Excel, so this isn't too hard for me to do. But when I played around with the formulas, I kept asking myself a couple of questions. I've added a week to the original 4-week meso, extending the 3rd week of 2 RIR to a 4th week of 2 RIR, and then a 5th week of 1 RIR, and then a deload. Week 1, 3 RIR, 85% of 10 RM. Week 2, 3 RIR plus increase in weight. Week 3, 2 RIR plus increase in weight. Week 4, 2 RIR again. Oh, interesting. No increase in weight on week 4?
So he did it on week 2 and 3, but not on week 4, not on week 5.
Week 5, 1 RIR. For week 5, 1 RIR. Would it be prudent, LMAO, can I sound more like a politician? No worries. According to Lyle McDonald, I sound like a politician.
Who cares what he thinks?
Yeah, I thought that was actually a compliment at my ability to be intelligent in flexible situations. LMAO, I sound more like a politician. For me to go to 95% of my 10 RM, 85. Okay, let me see. Is this considered overreaching? Also, could I change Week 1's 85% of 10RM starting point to 75% or 80% of my 10RM. So the super fast answer here is twofold. One, you can start your first week with anything between 30% and 80% of your 1RM, or close to 80, maybe even 85. And then we just recommend that your jumps week to week to week be very small, somewhere in the range of 1 to 2.5%, probably no more than that. So as long as you're doing that, then totally. Now, that 95% of 10RM, what we don't want you to do is take that number out of a hat and put it on week 5.
Yes.
Because it has to be, you don't want to do this thing where you're like squatting 300, squatting 305, squatting 310, squatting 330. Like that will get you hurt. And there's actually a good physiological rationale and plenty of good data to suggest that large spikes in either volume or load or relative effort can be particularly injurious, right? So if you're used to going 3 RIR and you go all the way to failure, if you're used to doing 300 pounds, you go 330. If you're used to doing 5 sets, you go right to 10. Then the chance of injury goes up, especially the session after that, because this does basically an inordinate amount of damage. So as long as you can start anywhere you like between 30 and 85%. We'd recommend, say, 75% is totally fine. Certainly your question directly is 75% or 80 of your 10RM is totally fine. Oh, sorry. So I should be clear. That's 30% of your 1RM, right? So for 10RM, right, yeah, it'd be something like, 50% or something like that. You could do the math. As long as your first set of week 1, first set reps on exercises don't exceed like 30 reps, you're good to go, right? And so you'll be able to figure out real quickly if you miffed that one. You could just adjust the next set, and then just make sure your increases in weight are either non-existent, because you don't have to go up in weight micro to micro, or very small, and you're totally good to go. So I would, if your question, because I can't really tell, James, and maybe you can help out, it says for me to go 95% of my 10RM, I assume that's about week 5. But if it's about week 1, the answer is you can, for sure, but then you might be getting super low reps towards the end of the mesocycle, and it just might not have the best stimulus to fatigue ratio when you're doing even a lot of sets of 5. It's like sets of 5 are fine. Technically speaking, they're equivalent in hypertrophy for short periods with sets of 10 and 15 and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's a lot of grinding. And if you repeat that mesocycle over and over, you probably want to not dip too far below sets of 8 on average towards the last weeks. James?
Yeah, that's how I interpreted what he said as well. And so kind of just to reiterate what Mike was saying, it's not so much of what percentage that you're using. Like it's hard for us to say, yes, 95% is the number that is okay. It's more about like where your reps generally are falling across sets, right? So if you're looking at 95% of your 10 RM, can we assume that the first set is within 6 to 10 reps? Most likely. I think most people would assume that that's probably pretty reasonable. What about set 2? That's a big question mark. What about set 3, 4, whatever else you got going on for that day? That's where we kind of are like, right? So I think it's fair to assume like pushing the boundaries of your 10 RM, at least for the first set, you're probably going to be within that productive like 5 to 10 kind of minimum threshold that we recommend for the heavy range. But after that, it's really hard to say. So don't rely so much on the like literal percentage recommendations, like as in like computer language numbers template, like so much as make small adjustments and just make sure that your reps are falling in the goal rep range week to week on average for all of your sets when you are making those adjustments. So some weeks you might not go up in intensity at all. You might only change, your reps in reserve, or you might even do the same reps in reserve and same general intensity, maybe just add a rep or two and that's it. That's fine. Or even add a set, right? So you don't have to do like a very linear computational thing across the way. So don't think of, again, just trying to reiterate, don't think of it so much as like these numbers are okay. It's more of what gets me into the rep and the loading zones that I want to be in on average.
Yeah, very good answer.
And then, sorry, I rambled already. Is this considered overreaching? Not inherently, right? Overreaching is more of a local and systemic phenomenon, not so much on a set, like one set basis, though it is feasible that you could overreach yourself on one set. It is totally feasible, but in this context, no, it's not.
Right. Sorry for the mountain of questions. Just released the goddamn hypertrophy book already. A lot of people have been saying that.
God damn it.
Jokes, it's all jokes. I know that shit takes time. Thank you for your time and answer as well. RP Plus, you guys get the scoop, and I suppose YouTube gets the spoils as well. The main writing for the book is done. James and Jared's main edits are done. I'm currently 2 days away from finishing 2 sections at the end of the book that are quick tips, a chapter summary. It's like a 10-point summary, and then quick guide to program design. And then James is making a paragraph section for each one of the chapters of how important each one of the principles is to the grand scheme. Like, if you fuck up overload, how bad do you have it? Real bad. Like, if you fuck up phase potentiation, just don't do it at all. How bad do you have it? It's not a big deal. You can grow muscle for years and years. It'd be fine. Although fine and optimal is 2 different things. So after that, we're done with pretty much all of the actual meat and potatoes writing, and currently Dr. Melissa Davis is starting the real mean-spirited edit of the book, which is a combination content edit and a lot of grammatical edit as well. And not so much grammatical edit, like, she doesn't change what we say, she just changes how we says it, so it's less dumb like I would say it and more like people understand it. And, James tried his best for that already, but probably Mel's a caliber above us as far as, reading comprehension. Also, she's coming to this. James and I are so ingrained in the depths of literature that mostly we're looking for content and we're blind to a lot of grammatical. Like, we already understand all this stuff. I would hope super well because writing a book about it. It's when you're writing the book, it's tough to
as well as
read
one
a sentence.
could at this point.
Yeah, sure. It's tough to read a sentence when you're writing a book and be like, I think that's understandable. Like, yeah, to you dumb motherfuckers, you already know everything already.
Yes.
Like, it's like a jiu-jitsu black belt being like, try this move, it's easy. You're like, easy, motherfucker. You got like 18 limbs moving in 5 different directions. What? So Mel is super, super smart, knows her training super well, but isn't, so into this literature and into this understanding that if shit is not obviously stated to her, or I'll put it this way, if shit is stated to her in a real circuitous, nonsensical manner, she's going to be like, this doesn't make any goddamn sense to me. It probably won't make any sense to the way, way above average RP reader. So she's going to basically make it much more elegant, and during the time that she's doing that, probably within the next week or 2, I'm going to make all the graphics for it. We already had a guy, a professional, make all the graphics we want, and I'm going to sort of layer them in and put the stuff. And then after I'm done with that, we basically wait on Mel to do one pass. We throw the graphics in, and all of us do another pass, including probably one other editor, and that's it. So, yeah, it could be, ideally, it would be about 2 to 3 months in which it comes out. But things come up, things happen, bigger projects are the priority, so we'll see. I would, if it comes out later than the summer, I'd be real surprised. If it comes out in the spring, I would be pleasantly surprised, or not surprised, right? If it comes out any sooner, I would be surprised pleasantly. So.
Yeah, and just for some inside scoop, so Mike gave a really good summary of kind of how a lot of this process goes. But one of the things that we've been trying to do a little bit better job of the last couple books is kind of the idea of being pretty bulletproof, where I think some of the first couple books there wasn't really anything. No, not even that. There wasn't really anything controversial, like the first diet book, the scientific principles of strength training. Like, there wasn't anything in there that was contentious in any way that people could really take a point to point on. Some of the more recent stuff that we've been doing, there are definitely opportunities for people to do that, and so we try to pass it through a lot of filters so that we don't just release a book right away, because Mike was like, all right, I got this idea, SFR, let's just make a book out of it, right? And then we bring it up, and then all you smart RP Plus people go, hey, here's all this fucked up stuff. This is inconsistent. Like, why didn't you guys think this through, right? So that's kind of the idea, where we go through and we try to think of, like, how could somebody feasibly and with well intentions take this apart and make it not true. And that's kind of how we go back and forth for a little while until we get to an area where we think, like, this is pretty solid. There's no major glaring holes, and there's no major counterpoints where we would have to submit and say, yes, this falls apart with your point.
We want it to be not just thought through, but thought through to an extent where you can read it and not have these, like, man, I wish they really, like, this doesn't make sense. Like, you're going to read it very likely and be like, man, this sure is complicated, because the book's supposed to be complicated, by the way. But you're going to be like, man, they really connected the dots on a lot of the shit. So,
and even
it's all about getting a good product.
We'll leave it alone and move on. Sorry, but like even the volume landmarks, that was one thing that we were really proud of, and at least to my knowledge, nobody's really given it like a 1-2 punch where it's like, this is where this falls short.
I've seen almost no relevant critiques at all.
Yeah, and you know what I mean. And so it was like putting that out there was definitely a big undertaking for us, and we had to really think it through and make it bulletproof. And I think we did a pretty good job. And because we did a good job with that, now we can use that idea and say, okay, well, now that we all mostly agree on this, let's use that to expand into other ideas like the hypertrophy book and SFR and other things, right? And so then it becomes, once we know like one thing is really secure and we feel good about it, then we can use it to build up other things. And so that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah. All right, Adrian Young. It's got a very short question, very short answer. Says, hi, I was hoping you could dive into your thoughts on nutrient timing and GH peptides in relation to optimal body composition, a combination of GHRP2 and MOD-GRF perhaps. So good news, bad news, Adrian. Bad news is I've never taken any peptides, and I have no clue what the fuck these specific ones are. I will say that BPC 157 works really well for healing connective tissue damage, like from injury. It's like I've literally never heard of GHRP2. I think that's the one that makes you hungry. Like literally, this is how fucking little I know about the shit. So, James, I assume none of this rings a bell.
No, but actually, that literally just sparked a conversation with I had with somebody, and that somebody probably knows who they are. So, wink, wink.
Boom. So, here's the deal. What you can do, Adrian, is sign up for Broderick Chavez's group. He has an RP Plus equivalent that's all exclusively about performance-enhancing supplements. And you will get derided in that group for asking natty questions. That's how hardcore it is. But you will get your questions answered. And you can actually ask him questions for free. He does Instagram lives all the time, Facebook lives all the time, answers incoming questions. What I can tell you from what he has told me as my supplement coach, so to speak, is that the peptides are cool and they have their uses, but nothing beats high quality, lab made, modern growth hormone, full peptide. So you get some Serostim your way, all these peptides start to look like small fries. But that is a general statement, and there's very good specific uses for some of these. And I have no fucking clue how you would time them. I have no idea how you would take them. I don't know shit about IGF-1. None of that crap. So, Adrian, best of luck. I would look up Broderick Chavez in any way you can find him. And his pay site's easily the best way. It's like $10 or something. $10 a month for all the questions you want to ask. That's the guy to go to on that. No clue here.
Sounds good. I have no input on that, unfortunately.
Fortunately.
I tried to dabble in that world a little bit, and then it's like so overwhelming where you're just like, I don't even know where to start.
So I'm not going to say too much about this. Lack of self-incrimination is always good. And I've said this publicly on a few podcasts. It really baffles the fuck out of me when people recreationally approach sports supplement use.
Sorry, I meant like from a knowledge perspective.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well,
but
so
yes, yes.
For sure. So, but even from a knowledge perspective, like some people will dabble in the knowledge and then gear up. And you're not, James, you're not using, but like some people who use, you're like, what do you know about this? And they're like, meh. And you're like, oh, sweet. You just put needles in your body of shit you don't know about. Use the heroin approach. That's cool.
For sure. Right. But hey, that's one that like there's a lot of instant gratification there, right? Where like I put this in and good things happen. All right, good. I'm
yes,
good.
If instant gratification is the way you live your life and is the only metric, then holy shit, you're gonna have problems. All right, Sean Murakawa Rubin. When in an alternate universe, Israel and Japan collided, only one man remained. I love that joke. I'll never stop saying it.
It's very fitting.
It's very fitting. Sean says, hey guys, I hope you had some amazing and well-deserved holidays. I hope your 2020 is looking great. Sorry for the mini wall of text incoming. Oh, come on. Don't apologize for questions that you paid good money for.
Same to you on the New Year wishes.
Likewise, yep. Number one, if I recall, there are general guidelines you guys give for longest a hypertrophy workout should take. I forgot the exact number, but for the sake of example, let's just say it's 90 minutes. Is that the time in and of itself? Is the actual reason a workout should be ended, e.g. physiological factors that cap out at change at 90 minutes? Or just most of that 90 minutes tends to be the amount of time on average where most individuals will start reaching excessively high set numbers. And it's the volume that's the reason, not the time per se. James, we'll get to this. We'll do one question at a time since it's too long to go all the way. Sure. I would say my answer to this is it's probably 85-15. 85% of the reason is just too much work, and at the end it's all junk volume. And 15, I think there is a time limit element that it's not just that the effort put in accumulates a lot of fatigue to where your fatigue is excessive and the volume is junk. It's that even the time of being psychologically in the gym training and other nutritional considerations start to sap you away. So like, for example, like watching movies doesn't make you tired per se, but like if I showed you 6 hours of Lord of the Rings, you might not pay attention too much for the Return of the King because you'd be like, Jesus Christ, like
I've done the
look
marathon
at a TV screen anymore. Yeah, it's tough.
I've done it.
So
extended editions.
right. So
Come at
when
me,
somebody
bro.
could ask you, like, so is it the fact that it's Lord of the Rings? Is it the fact that, you can only watch so much volume of movie? It's like, no, like if it was fast forwarded, I could watch it all in 30 minutes. It's just the fact that the time of being in a particular setting with all human endeavors is delimited and starts to produce a kind of fatigue or a suboptimality and ability to exert yourself hard. Like you spend enough time in the gym and you're just like, I don't fucking want to be here anymore. What the fuck are we still doing here? And that is definitely a factor, but mostly the factor is the amount of effort put in. So to put it this way, if you just bullshit with the guys and did like a working set every 30 minutes, could you train longer than 2 or 3 hours and still benefit? Yeah, probably. But after 2 or 3 hours, man, there's just not a whole lot of good stuff that happens at the gym because you're just too zoned out and won't be able to, especially for hypertrophy purposes, put tension through the target muscles with a diligence and focus that results in optimal gains because you just want to get the fuck out. James?
Yeah, and so I totally agree with that. And then just kind of on the latter part, whereas 90 minutes tends to be the exact or the amount of time on average when most individuals will start reaching excessively high set numbers. So the idea that's partially true. It's not just that they're reading. So we've talked about like doing so many sets that it actually starts to become kind of less positive, diminishing returns, maybe even moving into like nil gains and even net negative gains, right? But really the issue with the duration of the workout itself isn't so much that as there's just some time threshold, and this is going to be different for all people, but we're kind of saying like on average, there is some amount of time where the amount of like local gains that you're making from whatever you're doing is probably not outweighed by the systemic fatigue of just keeping going, right? And that's kind of what Mike was also touching on, of just like the mental aspect of being in the game, the physical aspect of being in the game. You start accumulating junk volume basically the longer the session goes on after the first, like, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes or so. And so then the question is like, it's not that you're necessarily getting excessively high set numbers and now you're getting negative returns on all the subsequent muscles that you're doing. It's really just that you're like accumulating a lot of junk volume. You're not generating a huge stimulus, but you are generating more and more fatigue. What is the net benefit of the systemic spillover from doing a really long session and the local kind of junk volume that you're accruing along the way? So it's kind of a weird intersection of like local gains versus systemic spillover. That's kind of the issue that I generally see with that.
Boom.
Hopefully that made sense.
Mm-hmm. All right. Number 2, a question from Mike's frequency debate with Tim Henriquez. I said that right. I always fuck it up. Mike mentioned how after first several sets of an exercise, the fast twitch fibers are likely too fatigued to keep going. So the intermediate and slower fibers take over on more subsequent sets. Is this regardless of rep range, even 5 to 10 in the first set? So I'll say that it is yes. The problem is after about 5 sets when they kick out, you're doing less than 2 reps at that point. If it's 5 to 10 in the first set after 5 sets or whatever, then yeah. This also depends on how hard you're pushing, but usually it is regardless of rep range. So what that means really is, instead of being in the 5 to 10 rep range, after enough sets to fatigue so it's almost like this. The faster fibers, when they become fatigued enough to contribute much less to force production, your force production goes down, and thus you're not able to hit 5 to 10 where you should have been. So yes, the answer to A is yes. B, if I'm understanding correctly, this almost sounds auto-regulating / too good to be true, as in it sounds like the fast twitch fibers almost self-correct / automatically get as much volume as they can optimally handle and turn off, so that the other fibers get their share. So the fast twitch fibers, assuming enough sets, pretty much always get their ideal volume out. No, unfortunately, it's not true. So the correct way to phrase this is that the faster fibers contribute vastly less force and activate less, not they don't. So you actually get the worst of both worlds. Successive sets after the faster twitch fibers no longer contribute a lot, usually are in excess of their ability to recover, in excess of what they can benefit from, but they still contract more and more and more and accrue more and more damage and junk volume, and that's it turns into a really, really bad deal. So the autoregulation does handle some of that, essentially. I wouldn't call it autoregulation, but the sort of self-correcting pattern absolutely handles some of that. But that doesn't mean you have free range to, after you've trained your faster fibers, for example, with heavy work or with whatever work, that you can just train your slow and intermediate fibers as much as you want, because the faster fibers are still active, though just not nearly as active. So you get to a point where at some point your faster fibers stop contributing much. And then at some later point, they still contribute some, and they reach their individual MRVs. And then at some later point, which I would not recommend you go, the faster fibers continue to go excessively over their MRVs in small amounts. Though I agree with you that if they kept being active, kept being as active as possible, you would really be even more fucked. So this sort of situation definitely ameliorates how much damage and fatigue the faster fibers can get, and does let the intermediate and slow twitch fibers play a little bit more with higher volumes and more sets, but it doesn't handle it entirely. So you still have to be, unfortunately, very, very keen on taking your faster fibers too far, which is why individuals and or muscle groups with a preponderance of faster twitch muscle fibers just cannot handle high volumes and frequencies, even though their lower fibers can, or their slower fibers can. The real way to do that actually would be if you knew that you had some faster fibers in a muscle and some slower fibers, maybe a lot of slower fibers. The way you could train some of the slower fibers would actually be to do a lot of submaximal work that doesn't all approach failure all the way, and do very high reps, 25 to 30 or something like that, and even avoid high velocities during that time. But the thing is unfortunate is that if you are so slow or twitch that you need to do that, man, you probably just aren't going to grow a whole lot anyway. So that's the deal. If you look at it as, we'd recommend training in the various rep ranges, the 5 to 10, 10 to 20, and 20 to 30. The reason that 20 to 30 range is really cool is that the faster fibers just don't get much work, period, out of that range, because they're just not on much. And by the time they want to turn on, they're too tired to turn on, because they experience a shitload of fatigue both from systemic, nervous, and lactic acid. So those sets of 20 to 30 probably preferentially favor the slower fiber types anyway. I think the best way to get at the problem of giving enough work to all the fiber types where the intermediate and slow need more is by doing a variety of rep ranges at appropriate volumes, not just doing a shitload of more sets at low reps and thinking, the slower fibers will turn on here and the faster fibers won't. So faster fibers still are on enough to get super, 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 super fucked. James?
Yeah, and so I like your idea of that being like an auto-regulatory thing. It's not quite. It's more of a self-protective thing, because if they were able to keep activating, you would just fuck yourself into oblivion and you'd just be perpetually injured or crippled all the time, right? So it's more of a self-protective thing, but it's a really good idea. And that's another reason why we recommend using all those rep ranges, like we said, because that's another reason why we don't recommend just doing all like 5s for hypertrophy, because at some point you're just not getting much more out of it, and you're just
great for faster fibers, but what about the rest of them, right?
But bad for everything else. And at some point, if you keep going, it's still bad for your faster fibers, because they're like just barely hanging on, right? Like I'm trying to do something, but I got nothing left.
Well, it was like the Brad Schoenfeld study where they did like 7 sets of 3 versus 3 sets of 10, same mathematical volume. The 7 sets of 3 people were basically broken in half, and they got the same hypertrophy, but the 3 by 10 people always asked for more volume. They're like, this is easy, I can do more. And it's like,
could have tripled their own volume at that point. Yeah.
So the benefit of the varied rep ranges is really, really legit. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Number 3, in the updated RP back hypertrophy guide, you mentioned that with 3 times a week frequency, MRV might be roughly 25 sets. So let's say that's roughly 8 sets as MRV. 8 sets as MRV each session for simplicity, sure. However, he also mentioned that this number is combined for both vertical and horizontal pulling, meaning it's really more like 4 sets per session MRV for horizontal pulling and 4 sets per session vertical. I would not immediately make that jump because the intersection of muscles used for both is very high.
Yeah.
Pretty much all of the muscles that pull vertically, teres major, lats, so on and so forth, pull horizontally as well. And do a lot of work and get a lot of stimulus out of, and a lot of fatigue out of pulling horizontally. But there are some muscles pulling horizontally that aren't really activated a ton pulling vertically. So your rhomboids, middle traps, erectors are not really active during pull-ups or pull-downs, for example, but they are very active during rows and various other things. So it doesn't convert to 4-4, but let's see where we go from here. James, any corrections there on what I said?
No, I was going to basically make the same point of saying be careful to assume that it's like a symmetrical distribution like that, because there is so much overlap, and it's probably actually in your benefit to be non-symmetrical in how that's distributed session to session.
Yes. We'll get to that. All right. Question A. I'm assuming the combining is due to lats being involved in most rowing. Yep, in part. But if you picked horizontal movements that essentially took the lats out, like high rows, or someone just naturally rows with their elbows very flared, could you then say both planes get their own independent MRV of 8? Well, so I'm not sure. I'll tell you why. Your middle traps, your rhomboids, and especially your spinal erectors get a fuck zillion amount of work and fatigue from every loading move you do. Good morning, squats, standing shoulder presses, for the love of God. So, and they typically, because they get so much work, they typically don't have a whole lot more volume tolerance to give as much as you would think with direct back work, right? So there's kind of that problem there. So I don't know if they would be allotted a full 8, right? Maybe, but you might have to rig your program a whole lot. I'll put it to you this way. Just don't do 8 sets for spinal erectors per session. You would die. You just would, your back would break in half. So maybe, but let's pick out the really good stuff from here, Sean, and I think you make a really great point. Like, if this is why autoregulation is such a beautiful thing. Everything we say in the guides is a starting point. If you notice that the way you row, or if you purposefully row without putting your lats in much, and you notice that by rowing without much of your lats don't get as much work, then you can do more lat work over what our recommendations are, even though your quote-unquote back is already at 8 sets per week. Like, you could say, okay, 8 sets per session. Let's say you did 8 sets of total rowing, but your lats barely feel a thing. Fuck yeah, do 4, 5, 6, fucking 7, 8 sets of lats after that. Totally fine, right? But on average, there's so much overlap that we didn't get any more specific than this. One of the one of the reasons why we don't actually get into real specific, like, there's articles online, which I have all due respect for, but some reservation about, like, how to train the teres major. Like, really? How many studies are there about that? And also, like, for the love of God, it's trained almost identically with the lats. I don't even know how to parse the two out. Or, like, there's some clever tricks here and there, but man, like, we really didn't want to make a muscle guide to be like, how to train your biceps, how to train your fucking brachioradialis. Like,
that's what I was going to
say. like if you really want to get into that shit, there's tons of good resources for that. I think strength and conditioning research, what's that guy's name?
It used to be the
Chris Beardsley,
but it's the other guy, yeah.
Chris Beardsley. His shit is great for, like, super specific, in-depth muscle shit like that. I don't know how externally valid it is, but it's really well-reasoned from a biomechanical perspective, so you can look into that. We're just not the people for that. And with all due respect, and I think there's great utility for that kind of stuff, I think the utility is great insofar as there's validity there. I just don't think it really is transferring very well to real-world gains. Like, just fucking row, don't go over your MRV, do pull-downs, you have a big fucking back. Like,
at least in this context, right? In, like, hypertrophy training, it's like, okay, are you really going to be differentiating these muscles on that level? Probably not.
Sure. And if they're lagging for you, you might have to get into the weeds on that, but the guides are essentially not for the weeds. B, I'm a little confused by the original premise.
Hold on, can I chime in on A?
Sure.
Yeah, so I like the example he gave here where he's like, okay, so if you do exercises where you're really careful about, like, not getting a lot of spillover across your back muscles, could you treat them independently, essentially, is the question. And the answer is yes, you could. You could do a different style of calculation. The problem is that you have to do that consistently, right? So let's say you had a session and your lat movement was just like a cable lat pull downs, right? Where you just keep the arm straight and just do, like, the lat kind of shrug movement. And then you do, like, as you kind of are talking about, like, the high elbow rows where you're not getting a lot of lat activation. You could absolutely, at that point, treat those two groups separately, and because there's so little spillover. The problem in that is that how often are you going to be doing training that's that segmented? Because the moment you switch over to doing a pull down or more of a traditional row, then you have to go back to the old way of doing it, right? Which at that point, you might as well have just stuck with that method of training the method of calculating that the whole time. That's where it's a good idea, right? It's feasible. You could definitely do it, but it falls short in practicality because almost nobody builds a big back from doing high elbow rows and lat pullovers exclusively, right? Sure. So that's kind of the problem there.
Yeah. Question B. I'm a little confused by the original premise. Didn't James Krieger's data give a rough estimate as 8 sets per session as MAV, let alone MRV? That would roughly double what was recommended, unless he also means as a combination of both. So James Krieger is approaching this from an incredibly theoretical perspective, where he just talks about muscles in general. And a bunch of these studies are exclusively on biceps and part of the quad, right? Like, James Krieger does not have data, because for the love of God, it sounded like an insult. Huge fans of James Krieger. We've presented at conferences with him. We know him personally. He'll be the first to tell you that there's not a science-derived MAV for back.
Yes,
for the love
data
of God,
doesn't exist.
Most studies don't even test the back. I mean, a lot of times, you guys will be real upset. If you read some actual studies, they'll be like, we did squats for the legs, we did bicep curls, and we did bench press, and then for the back, we did lat pull down. But you almost never see pull-ups or rows in a study. One is that rows are tough to get a really good endpoint system. Like, when does it start? When does it begin? It's tough to standardize technique. So they just don't even bother with it, right? It also is higher injury risk of bending over, and people hurt their backs. And these are undergrads most of the time, and there's barely lift weights. So there's no research to say what the MAV for back is and whether or not it's different for the horizontal and vertical pulling. None.
And for any of you who might be sitting there thinking like, well, why don't they do that? You guys know that they should, right? Well, the problem is that in the laboratory setting, this stuff's a lot easier to test in isolation for a variety of reasons. One, in isolation, you can just look at one muscle group and you know that there's no interference effects. You can standardize the technique, right? With the row, because the technique is so different across different limb lengths, different, levels of flexibility. Like, if you can't even bend down to pick up a barbell because your hamstrings are so tight, how can you standardize the technique? What if you have somebody who has 21-inch arms and a weak back? Like, how do you account for that, right? Like, right. That's why these things are really difficult. So more often than not, you're going to see something like a knee extension, a bicep curl, or a dildo tricep extension type thing, because they're easy to isolate in a laboratory setting.
Yeah. So then he goes on to say, but even if he meant combined as well, he didn't. He just meant for individual muscles, but he's not talking about the back musculature at all specifically. So that's MAV, and he said MRV could be as high as 10 sets. It could even be higher, which at 3 times a week would be 30 sets compared to the 25 you guys recommend in the guide. This is just a difference in data / personal observation. So there's no data on this specifically. So it's not a difference between data and personal observations. This is one of those where we have to do with a sort of true evidence-based calling, which is to take experimental data and take our own observations of physiological rationale and work with a bazillion clients and try to thread some truth out of that. What we will say is, we've already mentioned this, various parts of the back get a ton of work from not the back training, not specifically back training. And that fills in some of that volume, brings you closer to the MRV sooner. In addition to that, most rowing movements have, most back movements that aren't purely vertical involve, most of the back. And a lot of that extra work comes from the horizontal component, not the vertical component. So it sort of evens this stuff out. In addition to that, and this is something that has to be said, it's not said anywhere in the guides. It's not even, I don't think it's implied, but I'll just say it here. Our MRV, our volume guidelines are derived from the perspective of you train multiple muscle groups, probably your whole body.
Did we say that? Because I think I remember making that point at I don't know. That's a point that Mike and I always go back and forth where we say it's like an ecologically valid calculation, meaning it's similar to what you would do most likely in real life, which is you're probably training a very holistic approach on your body parts.
Shaw, the opposite of that is if we put in muscle only, like let's say we derived the local exclusive guides and back MRV was 35 sets. Somebody'd be like, hey, I tried it. It doesn't work. It's too much volume. They'd be like, okay, so what happened? I'd be like, well, with all the other pulling I do and all this other stuff, it just didn't work. I'd be like, oh, yeah, but these are just if you train back alone. And the retort, accurate as hell, would be, who the fuck trains just back? We'd be like, nobody. right? So this is in all these volume landmarks are in the context of the fact that you're just generally training at least your like a fucking college try for training most of your fucking body, you know? And we do note in the guides themselves, James, this is where you're getting this from, that these values do change. If you look, for example, the values for arms, if you don't do much chest or back training, the values for arms all scoot up like crazy because all of a sudden your chest isn't fucking up your triceps, your back isn't fucking up your biceps, you can do way more. Same idea for back in the context of a program. And in addition to that, you're right about the data/personal observations. We have noticed through training a whole bunch of people and observing a whole bunch of stuff and reading the literature to some extent that in the real world, with 3 sessions a week, most people do not exceed 25 working sets per week and survive for long. And these are just guidelines for average people and average, relatively strong, hard training people. Remember, our guides are targeted at people who have more experience than the average study participant, and these people get pretty fucked up. One thing you'll, from relatively moderate training volumes, one thing you'll notice that, you know, a lot of the folks that I've been debating on YouTube with Steve Hall, what's his name? Jordan Peters, Paul Carter,
I thought you were going to say
Scott
Jordan
Stevenson.
Peterson for a second. I was
Jordan Peterson, yeah, that's right.
What?
What? You're debating him on psychology? So a lot of these guys, their volume landmarks are way lower than the ones we recommend because they're used to working with and are themselves huge, strong, super fast twitch people. They just can't survive these crazy fucking volumes. And the thing is, a lot of times, moderately trained individuals have the highest set number MRVs of anyone because you just can't fuck them up. You, motherfucker, you row 95 pounds. I could do that shit too for 20 fucking sets a session. But you start rowing 315, the shit just doesn't work out the same way. So for us, it is in an intersection of, you know, our guides are targeted at well square in the intermediate range, 3 to 5 years of training. And the thing is, why they targeted people with 3 to 5 years of training? So you won't be able to understand the guides if you have less than 3 years of training. You'd read them and you'd be like, this doesn't make any goddamn sense. But after 3 years of
and motherfuckers who think they're advanced are not advanced. They're intermediate. You little bitch.
For sure.
You're intermediate.
So you'll was it the CT Fletcher diet 30-second YouTube clip? You've seen that one, James?
Oh yeah. What was it? Oh God.
Food.
So much.
It doesn't taste good. I can't eat this. It's like, you don't eat this shit for the taste. You eat it for results. What does he say? Like, you whining motherfucker. I was like, oh my God. This is the greatest diet advice you'll ever hear. Folks, Google CT Fletcher diet. It's like a 30-second clip. It'll change your life.
He's so great.
Post it everywhere. Yeah, it's amazing. Keeps it as real as it gets. So yeah, we think that, you know, and here's how you interpret our MRV guidelines with all that said. We don't say MRV is 25 sets for 3 sessions a week. We say, look, as you get towards 25 sets for 3 sessions a week, it's time to start looking at your performance. Because if you survive much further than that, man, you know, you're lucky and it's not usual. So we intentionally err a little tiny bit on the safe side with MRVs because we know that a lot of people will just be like, oh, MRV of 25. That means I can for sure do 25.
Not only the performance, but we go in the other direction too, where it's like, if you're going over 25 sets and you think you're making a good faith effort, like you got to reevaluate what you're doing. Are you actually doing good SFR stimulative exercises? Or are you just doing a bunch of garbage? And maybe you were doing garbage on accident. Maybe you were putting in a lot of work on the cable row or something. Mike and I always joke about the cable row because we just don't, Mike and I both seem to agree that we just don't get a lot out of it. So you might be like, God damn, I'm doing like 10 sets of cable rows like every other day. What's the deal? Well, it's like you made a good faith effort, but it's just a garbage exercise. And maybe you need to reevaluate which are really good SFR exercises for you at that point.
Yep, 100%.
Structure and flexibility. The RP Diet app builds a structure of eating that creates the results you're looking for, but has the flexibility to let you scan your favorite foods and follow your preferred diet philosophy. The digital diet coach in your pocket is more powerful than ever, so let's build a better you with the RP Diet app.
See, one more quick and somewhat related question. As mentioned, you guys are currently going through and updating all the RP hypertrophy guides for each body part. Are the actual MEV, MAV, MRV estimations changing? Yes, they are. Or most of just the other sections? If so, what would make the numbers considered slightly outdated? If so, what would make the numbers considered slightly outdated? updates in research, updates in our experience have made us update the numbers. For 2 quick examples, MAV numbers are now really pretty solid, mostly to James Krieger's work. And number 2, MV numbers have come down because we've learned
And
with
probably will keep coming down.
Will be coming down even more. We've learned with multiple publications, it was actually much harder to lose muscle than people thought. So it turns out MV is surprisingly much lower. To be honest, when I first wrote the initial muscle guide myself, I highballed the MV values because I thought people were just straight up not even going to follow them if I put the real ones I thought were low enough. Because nobody really believes you that you can train back with a sum total of 6 sets per week and just not lose any gains. Funny enough, James, I just posted something on my Facebook and Instagram about
I know. I had a couple client emails related.
Yeah, multiple frequencies.
Oh, Mike!
So a lot of people commented like, oh man, this means that I'm not going to lose as much muscle as I thought going from 6 sessions to 3 sessions a week. And I was like, no. You just make gains at a slower rate. You will lose 0 muscle. That's a very, very different thing.
Yes.
So it's one of the reasons we derived the volume recommendations, especially what James and I call the dead zone between MV and MEV. Is that a lot of people think that what it took you to get to a certain muscularity is what it takes you to stay there. People think that about all sports, actually. Like James, I'm sure you get people all the time.
I think sports is even worse. I think sports is even more guilty.
They're like, oh man, you got to practice tennis all the time to keep your skills. People are like, what? I haven't played tennis in 2 months. In 3 weeks, I'll be as good as I ever was and better. Like, what are you talking? Like, there's just not a thing. And people just think because people have the Rocky Balboa approach where periodization looks like just a big increase and then you compete. And then as soon as you take a day off, you get worse. And that's why you get retarded ass shit. No days off, brother. 7 days we're grinding. You're just a fucking idiot. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. And then even there's been more recent evidence of kind of validating our ideas on session level MAVs and MRVs, which, at the earlier hypertrophy guides, we were only thinking about that. It wasn't really quite validated yet. And now it is. And right now we can actually use some of that evidence and update some of those numbers. Funny story. I've had 2 male clients recently, one very recently, who they are on their mass phase. And they were like, I was like, what do you want to do? And they were like, bro, I just want to do typical, dude mass phase. Let's do chest, arms, abs. I was like, that's perfectly fine, right? And so I'm writing their program, and it's fucking chest, arms, and abs, basically every day, if not every other day, right? And they are like, what is this? How am I supposed to do this? I'm like, you don't understand. You're training legs at maintenance volume. You're training back at maintenance volume. You have no idea how much energy you're about to have that can be funneled into the 2 sides of your arms and your fucking chest. You know what I mean? You have no idea how much stuff you are going to be able to tolerate when you're not training back and legs. It's there's such huge muscle groups. I was just thinking about that because we were saying who just trains only back, right? But those are meaningful changes where you would say okay, instead of saying 8 sets per session on biceps, it might be 12 sets if biceps is one of the only things that you're doing. And that's fine.
100%. All right. A man with only one name, Aiden. Hi, Mike and James. Are there any disadvantages to building muscle if someone is extremely slow twitch dominant, apart from the obvious fact that fast twitch fibers simply go bigger and better and the slow twitch folks have to do more volume? Also, are these slow twitch dominant people still able to grow a lot of muscle?
Oh, I got this.
Yeah, sure.
So in the sense, are there any disadvantages to building muscle if you're slow twitch? So that first one, there's no disadvantage, right? Outside of opportunity cost. And what I mean by that is if your goal is to look like Jay Cutler, Dorian Yates, somebody like that, and you're somebody who did cross country in high school
and was good at
it, you're just missing out on time that you could be doing something that you're good at and that you might be just reaping massive rewards from. Now, is there any downside to trying to gain as much muscle as possible? Not really, if it's what you're interested in, it makes you feel good. But there is an opportunity cost where you could just be pursuing other endeavors in life, which are just maybe you're just more efficacious for you, or you just enjoy more because you're good at it, right? So that's really the only downside. You can still definitely grow muscle over time, even if you're a slow twitch person. You just have to understand that it's going to be substantially less than people who are just born bigger and stronger than you are. And that's perfectly okay. You can still make progress. You can still look better. You can still gain muscle. And some people, like Mike's a great example of this. when Mike was younger, he wasn't a huge guy. And you might look at him and think like, oh, he's just going to be like another cross-country guy because he was smaller in stature. Turns out he was an excellent responder to resistance training. The only way you know is you go for it and see what happens, right? And turns out it worked out really great for him.
We had a podcast with Steve Hall about genetics and muscle building. And the question that was being answered was, what does it take to find out if you have the genetics to go, like, maybe not the distance, but to be really jacked? And my answer was, you need to make sure you're doing everything relatively diligently, sleeping, eating, training fundamentally well. You need to give it like 2 to 4 years to see how your rates of progress are. And one of the comments is always like, if I ever have like too much faith in humanity, I'll read YouTube comments and bring my shit back down to the real world. But one of the YouTube comments was, man, that's a shit, like a dog shit answer. 2 to 4 years, fuck that, that's too long. I think you can tell in 3 to 6 months. And it's like, guy, maybe, the thing is, a lot of people that grow fast in 3 to 6 months will disappoint the fuck out of you after a year. And a lot of people that don't grow super fast in 3 to 6 months go on to just keep going and going and going and going. And all of a sudden, they're fucking enormous. There's tons and tons of accounts of that. And there's literature to support the idea that correlation with how big you are at the start or a few months into your training is not as nearly as high as you would expect with what you do when you're more jacked later. So wouldn't it be sweet if you could find out how good you could be at something 3 to 6 months in? Yes. And there is a correlation there. It is positive. It is large, but it's not what I would call holistically explanatory. Like, it's not like if you didn't get super jacked within 6 months and you're like, dude, I tried 6 months and I didn't get super jacked, fuck it. Don't quit yet. You know what I mean?
Unless you hate it. That's what I would say. It's like, if you fucking hate it,
quit whenever you want.
Just
right?
quit.
Yeah. Right. But that's like, doesn't matter if you do get jacked. If you hate it, still quit, right?
Just quit. Yeah.
But like after 2 to 4 years, if you're not much more jacked and you've been putting it in, man, there's no magic that's going to be like, I've never seen an individual who had the fundamentals checked in for 3 years and that got very shitty results and then tweaked some small thing and just exploded. That just doesn't fucking happen.
And keep a good perspective too, because like there's always going to be like the bigger and better person, right? Like we look at somebody like Chad Wesley Smith and we're like, God damn, that guy is fucking huge. I wonder if I could ever be that big. And he looks at somebody like Hafthor Bjornsson, like, God damn, that guy's fucking huge, right? People look up to Mike and be like, I wish I could be as big as Mike. Some people might look to people like myself or Eric Helmsize. I think we're pretty comparable, maybe between like 200 and 230 pounds at any given time. They might be like, God, those guys are big. Somebody might look at somebody like Steve Hall and be like, fuck, I wish I could look like Steve Hall. You know what I mean? Like
arms like Steve Hall.
Yeah. I wish I looked like Steve Hall half the time. God damn. You know what I mean? So there's perspective and there's always somebody that's going to be bigger, better, leaner, whatever than you. Just keep a good perspective of where you are and the progress that you've made and like what are some like reasonable comparisons that you think you can achieve. Like if you are a slow twitch person and you're like, I want to look like Mike Israetel, like your perspective is just wrong, right? It's just not going to happen. That will never happen, unfortunately for you, right? That's just the reality. And if you let that comparison drive you down and make you feel depressed, then you're just wasting your time. You're spinning your wheels. You could be doing something else. So just keep that in mind. Like the perspective is important.
There's a guy that I can bring up actually somebody, a real world person. James, you might have met him at one of the London seminars. His name is, he's a very funny name by American standards, Fabian Kraps.
That's an amazing name.
That's his real name.
Fabian Kraps.
So he is your European person.
Yes.
Very. And he's a super awesome guy. And he's been training for quite a while. And he's just like, he's like, man, like, what are my genetics? Because I haven't been gaining a ton of muscle recently. And him and I had like a heart-to-heart where I was like, look, man, like, you might not have unbelievable genetics. But the thing is, like, does he have a future in the highest levels of competitive bodybuilding? I could be upfront about this on live TV and say probably not. But the thing is, Fabian looks to almost everyone in the gym and everybody at the beach like a fucking god, dude. If that guy takes off a t-shirt, everyone's just like, man, fuck this guy. Like, look at all, he's got like 10 abs. Like, holy shit, that's a fucking accomplishment. Fuck winning the Olympia, you look amazing. Like, there's a lot of times we get caught up in our industry and our passion and hobby about like, man, I got to be the best guy and I got to be this and that. Like, don't worry about that. Do your best. If you're having fun, you already look awesome. Chances are you could look even more awesome. Like, I'm not an IFBB pro.
That's the idea, right? It's like you could always look more awesome. That's the idea.
Yeah, like I'm not an IFBB pro. There's a very good chance I'll never be an IFBB pro, though I won't stop trying for the next 5 years or so. And I go into most gyms when I'm on the leaner side and I get a pump and get to a tank top, and most people just don't even know where to categorize me as far as human being. What the fuck is wrong with that guy? Like, and a lot of people on here will be like, when they disagree with something technical I've said, they'll be like, fuck Mike Israel, he looks like dog shit. Like, really? Dog shit? Like 240 pounds with the ab veins is dog shit?
Pretty harsh.
It's a very incel level of dog shit. And it's funny too, because almost every single one of those guys is like no profile picture ass motherfucker. It's like, man, you must just be so jacked they can't even take pictures of your bitch ass.
Russian fucking troll, yeah.
The Cambridge Analytica ass motherfuckers out here. All right. Timothy Schultz. Tim, with all due respect, and we're 100% joking, your name sounds like the fucking nerd that like adjusts his glasses like this, and you get like punched in the face by the bully every other day.
Just don't break my glasses. Anything else is fine.
Hey, Timothy Schultz here. Hey, I'm allergic to everything.
I left the lunch money on the counter. Just don't break my glasses.
Fuck, James, where do you get this stuff? Unbelievable.
I don't know.
You have like an infinity. You're to nerd impersonations what that white room in the preload of the Matrix was when he's like, I want guns, and like fields of guns stream in. You just got them all, man. How?
I live that nerd life. I'm the fucking like the nerd who got into jock stuff. Like, I don't know. Right. It's just me.
That's right. And Timothy Schultz is probably that motherfucker who's going to beat the shit out of us real soon.
Yeah.
Like making fun of nerds that do the male physique template, catch you out in the street, like, all right, listen, Tim, I was totally kidding. Can I call you Tim? Let me pick up your glasses.
Can I buy you lunch?
Let me get you lunch. Let me get you 3 lunches. I never bullied you. All right. Fuck, real quick. I asked a good friend of mine who will remain nameless. This friend, in the peak of his powerlifting career, was pulling 300 kilos and weighed 260 at competition. And he did not look like that in high school. And I was like, did you get bullied in high school? Or just like randomly having a conversation. He's like, yes, it was terrible. And I was like, do you ever think of like confronting your bullies now? And he looks at me with zero humor in his eyes. He goes, absolutely. And I'm like, can you imagine some guy who's like 260 shows up at your front door like, hey, I'm what's his name? You used to bully me. They're like, listen, man, I have a family now.
Like, please don't kill me. Please.
The face. I need my face for work. You can bruise the body.
Everything else is fine. Oh my God.
Immediate hit to the face. He'd be like, okay, I deserve that. Hit the face as much as you want. Just don't kill me. He's getting beat really bad. He's like, just don't kill my family. Kill me, please.
It's amazing how many people go into combat sports that grew up being bullied.
Sure.
It's crazy. And because like there's part of that is like a want to be better and want to be like self-sufficient, but there's also a part of that is vengeance. You know what I mean? That is that.
That's my case for sure.
That's definitely there. You can't deny that is there. You know what I mean? Like you ride that high road, like self-defense, self-respect, betterment, all that. Yeah, fine. Shut the fuck up. There's vengeance. Dude, motherfucker.
I don't know a single person who's ever done martial arts.
You wanted to kick somebody's ass.
Oh my God. This is McDojo Life, which everyone should follow on Instagram. McDojo Life posted a video of a guy who had a guy come to his gym and claimed that his expertise was in the death arts. And it was like, all right. And he was like, I want to spar with one of your guys. And he was like, okay. So they gave him a pro fighter to spar with. When the guy was nice enough, he just teed off on him for a while. And then when the guy fell, he would like back off because he could have ended a fight in like 15 seconds. And then he let him get up and he'd fuck around with him some more. And then the guy like talked to them after. He was like, yeah, I've done this and that. And man, that guy's really good. And I've never done any jiu-jitsu except for some groundwork. And like the caption was like question mark. Like,
what does that mean?
What does that mean? So it was just amazing. He like had done like Wing Chun and some Muay Thai. Like Muay Thai, his stance was completely insane. He clearly has never been in a fight in his life. And I was just like, hey, kudos walking into an MMA gym and getting after it.
That's a level of pride and arrogance that is impressive. Like, you think you're just going to walk into this gym of fighters and be king of the mountain? Like, God damn, dude, good on you. Good on you for the confidence. You must slay in the dating world.
And the only part that matters.
Yeah.
All right. Happy New York, Docs. That's interesting. Happy New York.
Happy New York. God damn, he is from. Never mind. I'm going to bite my tongue on that.
Okay, I'm going to bite my tongue too. Both Mike and James, shut up now.
Yep.
I train 4 days per week using variations of full body male physique template, and I've since adapted with experience after purchasing a product. About once per meso, usually on weeknight in week 3 or 4 of accumulation phase, I just have a crap workout. I get to the gym, my joints ache, my initial warm sets feel terrible, my first work set is down some reps. I attribute this to just life stress / fatigue, but since reducing that is probably impossible for me, what do I do when those crap sessions occur? Take it as a single deload date and move on and train hard with reduced volume? Or train hard with reduced volume? I feel like all the options are bad. Some may be less bad than others. That's actually, that last sentence is brilliant from a life wisdom perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
I would say my best bet is if it's real dog shit, then scrap the workout, recovery session, basically deload, come back the next workout and rock it out. If it's like just bad, but you can still hit your numbers, they're just harder to hit than usual, then wiggle through it. James?
Yeah, and because you're using the MPT and you know that this is like a reoccurring theme, maybe think about rating during week 3 a little more conservatively than you normally would. Like, definitely don't do any +1s. Maybe even consider doing like a -1 at that point, and that might just help you keep you in the game. That little auto regulation might just keep you in there. But I think, yeah, like Mike said, taking a light session, see how that goes, and if you can bounce back and have good training for the rest of the week, that's a golden strategy. If you take a light session and you come back and you still feel like shit the whole time, I would say some more substantial, more beefy changes might be in order, and that might be like starting at a lower place in week 1, or maybe starting at the same place in week 1 and not moving as aggressively across the mesocycle from that point on.
Boom. All right, to YouTube.
Let's do it.
Let's get into it. I'm going to share my screen. Oh. Share. Okay.
Oh, what's this Peck guy one?
Which one? Oh, I love these. 9 best exercises for an attractive lower chest. That's what women look at.
Look at this guy with like moobs over here versus like jacked guy.
What do we got? We got everyone who eats needs to hear this warning. Okay, that's automatic bullshit.
I'm still stuck on this guy. He's like, my PCT didn't go very well. Look at my gyno.
Yeah, like, bro, you need plastic surgery for what the fuck you got going on. I love this. Ready? Okay, watch this. This is like Greg Doucette. Look at that. Look at him go. Fuck, wait, God damn it. It was working. There it is. That's wisdom, folks.
Waving hands around angrily.
Yeah. All right. So, white privilege. All right. This is really disturbing. Look at this fucking graphic here. Look at that. What the fuck's going on? It's like the devil biting somebody.
It's like a demon. Yeah.
What the hell? YouTube algorithm?
I was gonna say vampire, but it's got horns. So
yeah, and ears.
Yeah.
Fuck. All right. Let's get started. First good one I spotted here is Elijah Clifford. He says, James Krieger doesn't recommend diet breaks. Lyle recommends 2-week diet breaks. Why do RP recommend between 2/3 or 1x the length of the deficit that preceded it? What is yours and your client's experience with that? Please talk about your approach and how it came about. Thanks. So here's the deal. James Krieger doesn't recommend diet breaks, and neither do we, because this is not a diet break. It's a maintenance phase after the diet is over.
Yes.
I'm not sure the nature of Lyle's recommendations. I don't know if it's 2 weeks and then you start hitting a super insane hypocaloric thing again, or is it in the middle of one? Somebody left out that comes to mind is the 3DMJ guys, Eric Helms, etc. They recommend more frequent diet breaks, oftentimes 1 week every month, from what I understand. I don't want to caricature their position. So there's a lot more topography there that this comment doesn't cover, but this is a very good comment. The reason we recommend 2/3 to 1 time length of the diet that preceded it is it's like, okay, so here's the situation. You have a deficit, and then you have a question of how long do we maintain before doing another deficit, right? The reason is, and some of this actually, Lyle has written fairly eloquently about the various hormonal axes that are really, really considerably disrupted after months of dieting. And they don't just zap back to reality 2 weeks later. I believe actually Lyle's recommendation is 2 weeks at maintenance before a cutting phase after a massing phase. I don't think it's cut to cut. Correct me if I'm wrong. So James Krieger has actually spoken extensively in conferences about how long these things take to settle back to relatively normal. I think James would be fairly comfortable with our 2/3 to 1x the length. As a matter of fact, James might actually be more on the 1x plus length. James, remember that talk that James Krieger did in Finland where he talked about, I mean, it's a sobering talk. Because you're like, God damn, does diet fatigue technically hang in forever?
Indefinitely?
It's sort of parts of it do, right? What we tell people is like, if you were 200 pounds before and you're going to be 150 and live your life, it's going to always require vigilance, and you're never going to be a quote-unquote normal 150 because the fat cells there or whatever other hormonal axes simply don't seem to reestablish forever. But in our estimation of literature and our tons and tons of experience with clients to whom this is targeted, and this is targeted mostly at general population people that just want to they want to lose like 40 pounds, right? And they know it's got to come from 2 or 3 separate diets because you can't lose 40 all at once. And they want to know, like, how long should I wait between diets? And our answer for them is 2/3 to 1 time length of deficit, because for hormonal reasons, psychological reasons, and social reasons, we usually found that anything much shorter is just going to get you into a real nasty situation where you're super low calories again, your NEAT is super, super low. Like return to normal-ish NEAT is one of the ways we've figured out this number. And it's just going to be a dog shit disaster of a diet. It's like asking somebody like, I guess you could, the analogy would be like, if you have like, soldiers that you're sending on tour to fight a war, and then you send them on break somewhere, like how long are they on break before they're good to fight war again? And I'm sure generals and all sorts of people and military researchers have a pretty good idea of like, this is too soon, right? And many people can just fight war indefinitely, or a few people, because they're psychotic and they're perfect soldiers or whatever. But you got to look at averages, and for our purposes at RP, the 90th percentile, actually. Like we want most people to use this advice. And look, if you wait 2 or 3 extra weeks where you were totally ready, what do you lose? 2 or 3 weeks of not getting to your goal, but then you for sure get to your goal and you're super awesome and healthy for the rest of your life. But if we gave you a way too aggressive number, like if we gave half the length of a diet, a lot of people would succeed with it, but so many people wouldn't. The downsides just don't trade off that way. So that's my answer, James.
Yeah, and I'm just going to devil's advocate here because why not? But I know, and I don't want to speak incorrectly here, but I only know this because Mel has looked into it a little bit and she's kind of relayed some of the info for me. I know the 3DMJ guys have experimented with some protocols that are like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, kind of indefinitely until not indefinitely, but until the diet is over. And there is some kind of recent evidence that does suggest that method is just as good as some of the other more traditional, like cut all the way through type methods, especially for body composition and metabolic outcomes. I don't want to speak incorrectly, but there is at least some limited evidence that suggests that sometimes doing that style might actually be just as good as doing a normal style. So there is some merit to the idea of taking diet breaks. We typically like to approach the diet break, quote unquote, which we don't really do diet break. We do the maintenance phase, kind of like we do a deload, where when you fucking hit the brakes, you hit them hard, and we're looking for full, complete recovery, and that's both on the physical and psychological fronts.
Boom. Big question here, but one that is really interesting. Remco says, "Hi guys, thanks for the great content. Mike's very sensible advice really helped me get back to training after 2 surgeries to fix a lack of robotic arm. I now have a robot." I'm just kidding. Fix a herniated disc. Can you imagine going to the ER and you're like, my robot arm is missing? They're like, you have an arm. Like, it's not robotic. They're like, sir, get the fuck out of here.
But it's also a conundrum because you're like, yes, I have a robot arm, but now training is meaningless. No!
That's true. God damn, I never thought of that. But fuck training if you could just engineer the arm.
If you had like a bionic arm where it had had electronic and like natural.
Adaptogens.
Ooh, sexy.
Love it. All right. 2 surgeries fixed a herniated disc a few years ago. That's really cool. Ever since I've been using the RP male physique training templates. Look at that spelling physique. I love it. I love it.
That's so funny. Where is that
that's
from?
That's how physique should be spelled.
Where is that guy from?
Training is probably from the United States. Like, God damn, I butchered that shit.
It's from Alabama.
Man, there's a bunch of words I straight up don't know how to spell, man. There's a bunch of words I don't know how to spell. They're like, thank God, I don't know. James, remember the GRE?
Yes, there's no spell checks.
The section on the essays, guys. So you take the graduate record exam to get into grad school. It's a computer-based test, and you have to write an essay on a computer. There's no spell check. You're just like, oh my God, these people I did fairly well in it, but like I was just like, ugh.
Dude, I remember that because I was like, oh, I got this, and I'm like starting to write, and I'm like fancy word, then I'm like, ooh.
I don't know how to spell adaptability.
Let's just use really basic words.
Block spelling. With great success. Thanks a lot for that. Our pleasure. RP templates, like most programs, assume a weekly routine. What are your thoughts on structuring a 2-week training routine? Interesting.
We actually talked on that. Oh, God, I think it was like maybe 3 webinars ago or something where we had like a non-parametric style discussion, but I don't remember which one that was.
The situation is that I have my kids 1 week, but not the next. Due to time constraints and lack of a babysitter, I'm forced to train at home in the week I have the kids. At home I have a squat, rack, bench, and cable station. God damn, so I can train pretty well.
Oh, you're good to go, homie.
Hold up, not on this other week. However, the next week I am often away from home and would like to train at a gym, if only to get out of the house. Should I structure? Oh, never mind. It is both good. Should I structure this as a weekly routine despite different locations and equipment? For example, squat at home and squat at the gym next week too, to ensure steady progress with that exercise. I should use the greater variation of different equipment. For example, squat at home Monday and then do machine leg press at the gym the following Monday to hit quads with a different exercise. I could do barbell and cable exercise 1 week, blah, blah, blah. Yep. Okay. Or is that too much variation? Let's answer the variation and then the volume progression question. So I would say I would definitely take advantage of the variation and do mostly different exercises week to week. So you'd have like a week 1, 3, 5, and a week 2, 4, 6, something like that. Or even just week 1, 3, week 2, 4. I think that's totally fine. Because you're using more variation within the mesocycle, you would just lose less variation between mesos. So like a lot of your, like James and I would say, oh, normally you would switch out exercise every 2 or 3 mesos. Yours might be every 3 to 4 mesos or something like that because you're using them much less. James, with me so far on that answer?
Yeah, I was thinking like it's still probably not a terrible idea to keep some of your main lifts kind of in the mix. Like if you can squat and keep squat going, like that's
the
probably
barbell
a good
variance
idea.
for sure. I wouldn't do the cable variants because the different cables have different like lubrications and actual forces and angles and stuff.
But here's like a simple example, right? Where like in your home gym setup, if you're doing squats or let's say you're doing quads, like your first movement might be heavy squats. And then you could maybe consider doing down sets as your second activity, or maybe you do like a belt squat. Like I do a belt squat, Jimmy rig at my home gym, right? Boom. When you're on your gym week, you can keep the squats as your first exercise and then do like leg press or knee extensions or hack squats as your secondary exercise, right? That's a good way of keeping the momentum on the one lift and then getting some variation in there.
Yep. And then he says, how would the volume progressions then work? Should it be 3 sets of squats 1 week and 3 sets of leg press the next week to then increase the number of sets in the next cycle? Or should it be 3 sets 1 week and 4 sets the next week to progressively over the quads, even though it's a different exercise? Your thoughts are much appreciated. So Remco, here's the deal. Progression and volume should be auto-regulated. So both first weeks should be your MEV-ish. And the second week, your MEV for those exercises will be a little higher than if you just came completely untrained because there's some exercise transfer. But then what you do from week to week to week is going to be based on not just how the week before that went, but the week before that, plus the fact that you had some extra work last week, minus the fact that it was slightly different exercises. So for example, if you would normally progress 1 set per week on every exercise, does that mean you would progress 2 sets per week? Maybe, but then you're not used to some of the exercises, so maybe it'd be like 1.5 sets or something like that, right? So honestly, what you should be doing is this. When you go to the gym in the first week or you go to your house in the first week, go to MEV and get a good pump, a little bit of soreness, shut it down, note the volumes. For the exercises you have in common, in the second week where you go to the gym, auto-regulate to get the same degree of pump and disruption and so on and so forth, and maybe add a set to present some overload. And then for the new exercises, play it safe because it's your first week getting in there. And again, target the pump, soreness, so on and so forth, perceived level of effort. Like, what we don't want you to do is like, well, it says 5 sets of leg presses because I did 4 sets of squats last time, and after 2 sets of leg presses, you could barely walk, the lactic acid isn't leaving, and you can't bend your legs, and you're like, well, 3 more sets, and then you get so sore you can't train for a week and a half. Don't do that. So definitely auto-regulate. As a matter of fact, Charlie and I, my training partner, we were doing legs. This is our first week. This is our second week now. We did first week last week. last week we were supposed to do 3 sets of leg presses for high reps. After 2 sets, we literally both looked at each other and we couldn't bend our legs. And we're like, dude, we're done. And we went on to the next exercise. And I didn't heal on time for the leg day I had today. So I had to train a little bit sore, which is not something you want to do very often. So definitely don't do that thing where you're like, well, it's got to be progress, add sets. Use that auto-regulation. How big of a pump do you have? How much disruption do you feel locally at the muscle? How much fatigue are you feeling? How much perceived exertion? All of those are where they should be, and they should be a little higher every week, right? It doesn't matter where you go, what kind of gym and what you do, you always have those. Use those, and it's a self-solving problem. So, for example, if you used a barbell bent rows and you go to dumbbell one-arm rows because you're switching gyms, the one-arm rows, you'll get a pump a little bit quicker because of the novelty. And that way it'll drop your volume on them a little bit, which is good because with novelty, your MEV is still going to be a little low, right? So it's really a self-solving problem. So don't ever get this mentality. James, maybe you can comment on this further. Or you're like, well, it says 8 sets, and then your triceps are off the bone by set 6. You're like, It says 8 sets. Like, don't do that.
Yeah. So just to kind of reiterate what Mike already said, when you have a consistent week-to-week program, you can follow like really easy, simple, I don't want to say linear, but pretty straightforward volume intensity progressions. And that's usually what we would recommend to do, mostly for the sake of consistency tracking and all of the like. In your situation, there's a lot of variation from week to week, so you just can't do that same progression, and that's when auto-regulation is king. And I was going to say that the same idea, and Mike already knocked it out of the park. At this point, there's no other option but auto-regulation because there's so much variation week to week in what you're doing. You have to just take it one session at a time and just do your best. So starting at MEV and then go from there and this is where like having a pre-planned program intersecting with auto-regulation is really handy because you can say, okay, my typical mesocycle should go for 4 weeks. And so when I'm keeping this auto-regulation in mind, I know that week 1 is going to be MEV. Weeks 2 and 3 are going to just mostly be by feel. And then week 4, I know is going to be hard. And I know it's meant to be hard. And that's usually when I would crap out. So I'm going to auto-regulate and make sure I overreach at that time specifically, even if it doesn't quite feel like what I should be doing that day. That's kind of like a good intersection of those things.
Boom. Last for the YouTube questions is Kai Holland, who says, what are your thoughts on the efficiency of concentric only training? Is there ever a use for it? I read about it in Ross Edgley's book. He used it as a technique to reduce soreness and allow for more training volume leading up to his Everest rope climb as he was working to close a deadline. You guys are the best. Thanks, Kai. Kai, excellent question. James, you seem to want to really get at this.
Well, I was going to ask you because I've actually tried doing this. This was something I've experimented with when I was like in college. And so here's the thing that I kind of discovered, and I want to hear your thoughts on this too, because it's kind of an interesting thing. Like in theory, it should work, right? Where you're like, okay, if I add a lot of concentric, I can add concentric only volume. Although I'm missing out on the eccentric portion of the exercise, I can still just add more stuff, right? The problem is that there's basically only 3 exercises that I have figured out that this can actually be done in any meaningful way outside of using like fucking gyroscopic machine technology, right?
We're dropping all the weights all the time.
Right. So your option basically in most realistic situations are pull-up variations, which you can just drop to the floor, dip variations, same thing. You push up, drop, and then really it's basically like bike ergometer for the legs. There's really no other option for except for dropping the weights with the deadlift or something like that. So your options are very limited. It's very difficult to program. It's very difficult to auto-regulate. And what I found was that it really didn't enhance anything for me. I didn't feel like it was really adding a lot of strength or recovery or volume at any point. I think that there are opportunities in sport training where doing something that's kind of concentric only. A good example of concentric only is actually in the pool where you're mostly just moving and you're not having a loaded resistance on the way back. You're just doing the antagonist movement a lot, right? And that is something that does seem to have some efficacy in like as like a light session type activity and just kind of some light activity that can stimulate some recovery. But in the weight room specifically, I have had no success having played around with this stuff. Mike, have you ever tried any of this kind of goofy stuff?
Yeah, sure did. I did some concentric only training. I've done some eccentric only training and allow me to segue to my, as always, Thomas Sowell inspired bullshit. exists a notion that rears its maybe not ugly head, but predictable head in sport training and hypertrophy training specifically, that there are ways to rig the system to get these really big benefits with very low costs. And it's predictable, and it happens all the time. And training with eccentric only and concentric only have at various points been that. And this is where the Thomas Sowell part comes in, is, you know, he retorted one time to someone by saying, like, do you think you're among the first several thousand or several million people to have that idea? Like, someone's like, wow,
Right.
you ever thought of this? But like, you're not even remotely the first person. So here's the deal. For everyone that says, hey, what do you think? Like, do you think eccentric only training works? First of all, you're not remotely the first person to have that idea. And second of all, wouldn't it be pretty fucking obvious if that netted these unbelievable gains versus other kind of training? So maybe it wouldn't be obvious, for sure. But it's really interesting when there's not even a consensus on which side probably works. Like, if you talk to most bodybuilders, most people who train about range of motion, even if they don't practice full range of motion, at least most bodybuilders pay lip service to it. Like, you can joke with a bodybuilder that does partial ROM, like, hey man, look at that guy doing partial ROM, and they're like, yeah, fucking pussy, you know, he should be doing full ROM. Like, people sort of just kind of know, like, gaining weight on low calories. Most people are like, yeah, of course that doesn't fucking work. But when you have things that are probably just pretty equivocal, you start to see roughly even number of people on each side. For example, the keto carnivore people versus super high carb vegans, anti-protein vegans, which is not all vegans, by the way. I mean, both are just as convinced that they're correct, and both are just, you know, like, just as wrong as one another, because it turns out you can eat both ways and it's fine, but a balanced diet is also great. Well, the thing about it is, through animal studies, we know that concentric, eccentric, and isometric training, and this is, well, by the way, I missed one, isometric training. I have done isometric training before, and it's been very well researched. Isometric only training is actually the easiest one of all these to do, because stapling something to the ground isn't that hard. And they've all come to roughly the same conclusion. So first of all, the animal studies show that there are slightly different hypertrophy pathways for all three of those, right? Which is trippy, but sort of expect. Secondly, they've tried ad nauseum to show that one of these is more hypertrophic than the other, and they've largely failed. There is a slight bias in literature that isometrics, is for the effort you put in, just don't grow as much muscle as concentric and eccentric. But I will say that eccentric versus concentric, if I was to review the literature, I would say concentric only probably grows something like 80 or 90% of the muscle that eccentric only grows. The benefit, though, is that concentric only is not as fatiguing and damaging. But here's our key concept from our RP bullshit. The stimulus to fatigue ratio is just, direct Thomas Sowell quote, by no means clear which one of those, eccentric only, concentric only, or isometric only, wins on stimulus to fatigue ratio. And I suspect that if one of them wins for a certain time, a mesocycle or two, the other one resensitizes so much that it starts winning. So at the end of the day, it's probably a good idea to just fucking do all three. Maybe not all the time. Maybe you can have some variation. For example, some eccentric accentuated movements, slow eccentrics, extra pauses, extra peak contractions for isometric, some really exaggerated concentrics with a bit less of everything else, sure. But to think that there is some magic dust that, oh my God, concentric training grows just as much muscle, but at the same time has almost no fatigue contribution is just unfortunately not true. There was a gym in the University of Michigan, a special gym you had special access to, which I never got access to, just but once. I took a tour of it, where they had what are those called, pneumatic machines, where they're only concentric by definition, or the harder you press, the harder machine presses back, but there's no eccentric. That gym was billed as a way to enhance strength and health, but not build muscle and become bulky, because the idea at the time was that concentric only training didn't build any muscle. It's actually false. It does. It doesn't build quite as much muscle as eccentric only training, but them together build the most possible muscle. So in other words, is concentric only training a tool you could potentially use in moderation to get some interesting benefits on the side? Probably. Is it a thing where you're like, dude, concentric only, no fatigue, tons of growth, it's fucking awesome, never do eccentrics again? Absolutely not. James?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's at least one review, if not maybe maybe more than one, maybe two, where they've looked at, I think they took isometrics out of the equation and they looked at concentric only versus eccentric only versus combination, and combination wins like every
Combination wins every time.
time.
And it's not even that clear that concentric and eccentric are very different from one another, because it used to be like, because it's funny, your question is funny because it's actually backwards to the question most people ask, because most people, James, we would say most people are interested in eccentric only, right? They eccentric, but it's like even concentric. The thing is, eccentric does grow more muscle, but eccentric definitely causes more fatigue than concentric only. But I think it probably pretty close to fucking balances out. Yeah. And sorry, last thing, and like James said, even if it didn't balance out, even if it turned out that eccentric, let's say just make this up, you actually should do a little bit more concentric and eccentric, or the other way around. The realistic application of that is so fucking perversely difficult. Tracking is so difficult. What are you gonna do for leg press? What are you gonna do? You gotta have people lower leg press for you. You know, maybe they have super awesome gym machines with amazing technology later.
Ooh, I thought of one, right? It's you go up the stairs with like a weighted vest,
an elevator down,
elevator or slide down. Yeah,
skateboard down,
Legolas style, right? Like pew 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 pew.
Crack your skull open. People are like, "What happened?" You're like, "I was lifting weights." Like, "How did you do this?" You're like, "I was lifting them on the stairs." People are like, "Are you an idiot or something?" Yeah, sure
okay, so here's a good example of this idea actually playing out in real life. Track cyclists. Track cyclists have huge fucking quads. A, they probably had huge quads, and that's why they got into track cycling. Fair enough. B, they do a lot of strength training. But C, they basically do cycle sprinting, which is concentric only, which is a huge metabolic stimulus, right? So when you do that fucking crazy cycling, you're just generating a huge amount of metabolites. You have ischemic conditions until it's done, right? And so they might be reaping a strange kind of metabolite-driven hypertrophy benefit that they're not getting from the weight training alone, right? And that's why you see some of these fucking, what's it called? Velodrome. You see these guys, they have like outlandishly big legs. We're like bodybuilding sized quads. Now the rest of their legs don't match, but their quads are like, what is going on? That's an example where, yeah, you might be reaping some concentric only benefit, but to start to apply that to other muscle groups and to start training that in any meaningful way outside of, this is a sport, right? They do it for sport. I don't know. You could think of like the prowler, like the sled push. You have a similar thing. You don't get the concentric only on the lower leg because you're stepping, but the upper leg, right, is just push, 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 push. Similar effect there. Yeah. But then again, it's like, how do you program that?
And also, like, if you look at the stimulus to fatigue ratio and just the stimulus to time ratio, I mean, track cyclists have big quads, but all they fucking do is train their legs and go on the bike, right? And before weight training was common in track cycling, they had smaller legs. They were still huge, but not like go and tell everyone that bodybuilders have smaller legs kind of huge. So it's kind of one of those things like, oh man, like you want big legs, just train like a track cyclist. You mean 20 hours of riding the fucking bike where you get out of your fucking mind?
Yeah. Like what about the rest of your body at that point? Right?
100%.
You're not going to get that. Have you ever used the arm ergometer?
Fuck that thing. Yes.
It's actually, I would argue, unless you do it one at a time, it's hard to even do a concentric only because the other arm, I don't know if it's just me, but tends to resist.
Yeah, 100%.
It's just like you're fighting. You're trying to go, but the other one's like, I'm not sure about that. Right? I don't know. It's hard to really get it.
When the arm ergometer, you'll see it in really old gyms. And it's like somebody thought, man, we have this for a lower body, which is the bicycle. It'll work just as great for upper body. And it just doesn't. I've never seen anyone use that to benefit outside of rehabilitation side.
Yeah, I was going to say like wheelchair users, that's a common modality. But outside of that and rehabilitation, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Not good.
Anyway, TLDR, do concentric and eccentric. It's okay to emphasize one or the other a little bit here and there in your training for variation, as well as isometric, but there's probably not any magic there in like, ooh, this miracle of concentric or miracle of eccentric or miracle of isometric training. And hilariously, all three have been proposed as miraculous, weird ways of training, and people have made money off selling books and stuff about them.
Go figure. All right, well, is that it for today?
That's it.
All right. Well, we had some good questions, folks. Thanks for tuning in. If you are watching on YouTube and enjoy Mike's and my ridiculous banter and bullshit, hit that subscribe button. God damn it. Get the updates. We come out at least once a week. We used to do it on a regular time schedule. Right now, we're kind of switching gears. We're just going to do once per week. So if you want to make sure you get the video as soon as it comes out, hit that subscribe button, subscribe to all of RP's nonsense, and you'll get it as soon as possible. If you are interested in getting your answers, oh, God, I suck. getting your questions answered explicitly, you got to join RP Plus, my man. That's where you go. If you write questions on YouTube, we kind of pick and choose which ones we think are good. If you want to definitely get your answer questions, check out RP Plus. In addition to this, there's all sorts of cool videos, blog posts, recipes. God damn, there's so much stuff on there. I don't even know anymore. Didn't we calculate that there's like so much video on RP Plus right now that you couldn't even like finish it in your lifetime?
Yeah,
some
like
ridiculous.
If you just started watching them, you would have to watch like an unbelievable number of hours of video, and there's always more coming, so it'd be tough.
All right, so if you want to join the discussion, hit up RP Plus. If you enjoy these YouTube videos, subscribe for us, and keep sending in those good questions, folks.
Peace, homies.